When a child is struggling in school, is it developmental or normal? Can it be a sign of a learning disability?
It might not be sort of obvious until later when you think back, right? So hindsight's always 20/20.
A pediatrician talks about what ages kids commonly get diagnosed and how to know if your kid needs extra screenings. And girls are hitting the gridiron. How girls flag football is booming and the NFL is helping to grow the sport.
I want to be up there. Like, I want people to see me on TV and be like, Jay Jones just made the best catch.
That's today on Mom Squad. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into Mom Squad. I'm Maureen Kyle. Can you believe it is time for the kids to go back to school? I asked our friends on the Mom Squad Instagram page whether they were ready or not. 31% said they were ready to send the kids back. 69% said they aren't ready. And it's not just because we don't want to say goodbye to summer. A recent survey released by Life 360 took a closer look at some of the stressors parents feel with the school year. Of the 1,000 surveyed, time and logistics is the biggest issue. This means getting kids to and from school, juggling all the after-school activities and sports, as well as all that homework. Parents said they spend 17 hours per week coordinating the family activities. Then there's the issue of money. According to their research, families spend an average of $458 on back-to-school supplies. Some other studies show that number is almost double. Now, here's what the results of this study boils down to. 57% of parents say fitting in all the daily activities is a challenge. 54% say they have trouble keeping track of all the details of the family schedule. And 68% of parents say they are burdened by the number of items on the to-do list every day. Another major stressor for parents is my child's learning on track? I've had so many conversations with parents about whether their child is at the right reading level. They worry about developmental delays or learning disabilities. Today, we talked to Dr. Jacqueline Branch, a developmental and behavioral pediatrician at Akron Children's Hospital. We go in depth about what a teacher might notice in your child's learning and when they'll recommend a screening. Dr. Branch, this is the time of year where parents are sending kids off to school, and maybe they might have noticed something last year. Maybe they might be concerned about, are they learning the right way? Is there something that a teacher would pick up on? I want to talk about some of the learning disabilities that pop up throughout school. What do you think? I know most people think of ADHD as like the first one that teachers notice, but what are some of the other learning disabilities that you think teachers will be able to identify as kids head back to the classroom?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So yeah, you're right. We hear a lot about ADHD, right? That's usually a pretty significant impact in the classroom, but there can be other things that are impacting someone's ability to learn. Learning disorders for sure can come up. So when we're talking about learning disorders, we're looking at sort of an academic mismatch, right? Someone is being taught a certain way and not learning like you would expect them to learn. So there are specific learning disorders in all areas. So what we'd be looking for were difficulties in reading. That would be a specific learning disorder in reading. Writing, there's a specific learning disorder in writing. And math, specific learning disorder in math. So it sort of just depends on the subject the child is struggling most in.
With reading, I think that's the one I hear about most among friends is my child struggles to read or is behind in reading. And I know that there's extra reading programs in most schools, but what is it specifically? Let's go subject by subject here. What is it specifically with reading?
Yeah, so reading can be sort of two different things. There's a learning to read and then reading to learn, right? So when kids are younger, they're learning to read. In that area, you might see a harder time with learning letters in isolation and then learning that each letter makes a sound and then putting those things together to be able to sound out words. So we see some difficulties there. We then sometimes see difficulties in learning sight words. Those are more like memorizing words, seeing a word and knowing it right away. that evolves over time to reading to learn, where then you have to be able to say, read a textbook and then learn from that. So then we're looking at more like comprehension difficulties or understanding what you're reading. So it depends a bit on the age, whether someone is still learning to read or they've advanced and they're supposed to be comprehending what they read.
So is there a certain disorder tied to that? Is there a name for that?
Yeah, so one we hear about a lot is dyslexia, right? So that's been in the news a lot lately too, because Ohio does have a new law in place that schools are screening for dyslexia now, which is great. Kids with dyslexia are that earlier version where they have a hard time learning letters, then hard time learning sounds, then hard time like sounding out words or recognizing sight words. So that would be one of those earlier learning to read disorders. And then later on, if they haven't learned to read, of course, the rest of it is difficult too.
Yeah. With comprehension, does that fall under dyslexia or is that a different disorder?
It could be if the problem is related to reading the words. There can be specific learning disorders in reading that have to do with comprehension later on.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned writing too.
Yeah.
How do you know when a kid just has bad handwriting, or is it like, how does that pop up?
Yeah, so sometimes it is the mechanics. So the bad handwriting is usually the mechanics of writing. So that can do with learning problems, but also with fine motor skills. So when we see kids who struggle with the actual mechanics of writing, we sometimes have them evaluated by an occupational therapist to look at their actual, how they hold a pencil. They can also check like how their eyes follow along the page, because that can be a problem too. So that can run into bad writing, right, with spacing and the letters are too big and off the line. So we want to look at sort of the fine motor skills involved in writing. So that can be an occupational therapist and someone can work with a child on those things. There can also be learning disorders in writing that have more to do with like getting your thoughts on paper, right? So some kids really have great ideas and then they just can't put that into words. And so that is another sort of piece of the writing. So there's the mechanics of writing, but then also being able to sort of get the words onto paper.
Yeah, and what, I just want to have more information for parents there. Is there a name of a disorder that's tied to?
Yes. Yeah, so if there's the difficulty with the mechanics and the getting thoughts on paper, we do have a diagnosis called dysgraphia. So it's kind of like the writing version of dyslexia, right? There is also a math version too. So we're always looking for all the different bits and pieces involved in each subject to be able to know what to call it. Yep.
So yeah, let's go into math because is that, again, dyslexia, dysgraphia, or are there other disorders that would pop up?
Yeah,
and how
so
does that
there is a
apply?
math. Yeah, dyscalculia, which is kind of a hard word to say and spell, right? So that's a math version. Math can be a tricky one because as kids get older, there does become a reading element in math too. So we see some kids have difficulty with sort of basic number identification, basic math, addition, subtraction. Those would be more like math learning disorders. But someone with dyslexia or a reading disorder, you can imagine then when you get into the older grades and it's word problems. So we sometimes see reading disorders show their face in math because the math includes reading. So if you can't read what the word problem is, but then you can do the math, it's obviously more of a reading problem. So trying to tease out whether it's a math problem or a reading problem can be a little bit difficult in the older grades too.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that, those word problems.
I know, that one always comes up. Yeah,
Right.
like math is great until third grade when you have to read the word problems, right? Yeah.
So how do you know, like, is there a fine line, or how do you know when a child might be struggling with these disorders or might just be like a late bloomer when it comes to learning some of these subjects or catching on, or, you know, waiting for that light bulb to go off and then the developmental like catches up?
Yeah, great question. So you're right. Kids learn at different paces and they might, someone might be a star in reading early and then catch on to math a little bit later. I would say the biggest thing is to talk to the school, ask the teachers. The teachers have seen hundreds and hundreds of kids come through. And so they sort of have a handle on whether someone is just late blooming or whether someone is really struggling. And the other thing to know is that schools might be doing something about it and maybe you just don't know, right? So there are some like screening procedures that might happen in the classroom. Maybe someone is getting some extra help, but you just don't know about it. So I would say absolutely talk to your teacher, talk to your school, ask those questions. Do you think my child is behind? Are you doing anything to help them? Should I be doing something at home, right? So the more the communication exists, the better, just so that everyone's on the same page and we're making sure the kids that need it are getting extra help.
Yeah. After a quick break, what age do these learning disabilities start to pop up? Dr. Branch talks about what grade your kid's teacher will notice signs and what to do if the disorder goes undiagnosed for years. Welcome back. Today we are talking about learning disorders, not only which ones children are diagnosed with, but at what age. Dr. Jacqueline Branch with Akron Children's Hospital talked to us about the ages we need to be paying closer attention to. I want to start with age groups too here with the younger ones. Mm-hmm. I know that kindergarten, you know, they still have some speech issues just because of their age. Yeah. But at what point would a parent or a teacher be concerned about maybe some extra speech help if a kid isn't developing the way they should?
Yeah, great. So earlier the better too, right? So like you just described, if someone is having some difficulties, the earlier support, the better. Schools are probably also looking at that pretty early on. So for most kindergartners, if a teacher is noticing some articulation differences, I would think the school would already sort of catch on to that. Some schools have a speech pathologist in the younger classrooms for the whole class anyway, for bits and pieces of the day, which is great because you obviously see some of those things as typical, but still nice to help all of the kids if you can. Again, if you're worried about it, I would absolutely ask your school if there are any articulation differences or language difficulties that are impacting a child in the classroom. The school would have a speech pathologist that would be able to work with them.
And then kindergartners, are teachers able to see any other patterns of dyslexia or dysgraphia or anything at that young of an age, or does it start to present later?
It generally is diagnosed later. And like you alluded to earlier, some kids might just be taking a little bit of time for certain things, especially say a kindergartner who didn't do any preschool or pre-K, which, you know, is a very typical thing. So that might be their first school experience. So in a kindergartner who hasn't had other school experience, they're catching on to lots of other things, a routine, being away from home, sitting at circle time. So there's lots of things to learn in kindergarten. And so if the academic piece isn't fully there, I think most teachers would expect that to sort of come along. But you can see some early things. It might not be sort of obvious until later when you think back, right? So hindsight's always 20/20, but I do think that some young kids struggle maybe with learning letters and then learning that each letter makes a sound, right? So those early letters and sounds are super important. And I don't think we always recognize that someone's having a hard time with that until then reading comes and they can't sound out a word. And then you think back and, oh yeah, they really did have a hard time with letters and sounds.
So is there an age range or grade range where you see the majority of these diagnoses pop up?
Yeah. So I would say on average, I think probably third grade. And let me say that's probably because that's that grade where I feel like the change is where you're reading to learn. So you have to be able to read fluently to understand what you've read. You can imagine if someone is taking so long to sound out one word, by the time you get to the next word, you don't know what you read 2 words ago. And so to put that together to comprehend what you read is really hard. And so that's where I think it becomes more and more obvious that someone is taking too long to figure out the word, then their brain just can't comprehend what that was. And it feels to me like that's kind of like a third grade skill.
Yeah. Is it possible, because I've heard stories, and tell me if you see this in your practice, is it possible that kids don't get diagnosed and you start to see, like a parent or a teacher might question more like late junior high, even into high school?
Yeah. Yes, yes. And part of that has to do with these kids are smart, right? So they have found ways to get by. And I think kids realize they're having a hard time and they have found strategies that work. We see kids who just memorize the words. We see kids who take pictures of the words so they sort of like see the shape of it and fill in the blank. They look at the pictures on the page. You can look around the room sometimes in these elementary rooms and you see like the posters on the wall, and some kids find ways to learn that letter equals this picture, so I can remember it that way, right? So these kids are smart and they find ways to get by, especially if they realize they're struggling. And in that case, yeah, they might get by and they might get to junior high and then realize like, whoa, I am putting so much effort into this, and that effort is not sustainable sometimes.
Is there what's the rate of any of these disorders being in tandem in a kid? Like, is it possible that they have both, or they're, because they have this disorder, they'll also have the other?
Yeah, great question. I honestly don't have numbers for you. I could look that up, but it is very common for them to be together.
Okay.
Yeah, so very commonly for them to be together. So if you're noticing one specific subject area and you have your child evaluated for that, it would make sense to think about the others too. So they're very commonly running together. Yeah. And they also run in families. So that's another thing is we have a lot of parents who worked so hard to get through school and never knew they had a diagnosis or a disorder. And so now they're working so hard with their child. And you can see where like that work ethic is amazing, but it is so burdensome on the family to work so hard at home. But it runs in families, and you just might not know that was a diagnosis, and that we just didn't think about it all the time in the past.
Yeah. Or, somebody did a good job of getting by and never got diagnosed. The other thing, before I leave you here, the other thing that I hear come up among parents is, especially in those early years, whether it's been ADHD or some of these learning disorders, I've heard parents say they're afraid to get their kid diagnosed. It's almost like they're afraid to admit something might be wrong, Do you see that with parents where they're almost nervous to get that diagnosis?
I do. I hear the word label a lot.
Yes.
I don't want to label my kid. And I try to have a frank conversation with families that the reason we want to do that is so that they get the help they need. We want our kids to be happy and successful, right? And if school is not a happy or successful place, that can be a pretty miserable, 12 years, 13 years that you're in school, right? So we want our kids to be happy and successful. And sometimes making a diagnosis allows them to get the help that they need. And getting the help that they need makes school a better place. We don't want to have any people hating school forever, right? And so it's great to make sure that we're supporting them in whatever area they need support.
Yeah. So let's hope, let's say a teacher comes to a parent and says, hey, I think we should get so-and-so looked at or checked. Yeah. What is the plan that needs to be put in place, and what team do they need to surround themselves with?
Yeah, excellent question. So a lot of that comes from the school. So if the child needs support in school and the school recognizes it, or the teacher recognizes it, or the parent recognizes it, right, that school can do an evaluation. So school will do an evaluation looking at that child's IQ, at their reading, at their writing, at their math. They might end up putting together what's called an IEP, or an individualized education plan, if that child qualifies, meaning if their learning is impacted enough to need some extra support or sort of a change in the curriculum. So that is something the school can do. I think it's also important to make sure your pediatrician is aware. Asking your doctor, they can help you they can help you understand the process, right? Who is on the team? They can help you refer if you need to see a specialist. They can rule out other things, like we already talked about ADHD. They can ask about hearing, vision, how's the child's eating, how's the child sleeping. These things can obviously impact sort of your day-to-day functioning. So we want to make sure we're kind of ruling out anything medical and making sure the school is supporting the child and the academic needs that they have.
Yeah. Dr. Branch, thank you. This was so much information that I feel like all parents need, because I know as a parent, we've looked at our own kids and gone, is this normal development or are they struggling? So it's invaluable to have this type of information.
Yeah, my poor kids, they have to deal with me analyzing it all the time. So.
Yes. Yeah, well, thank you so much. I appreciate the time that you spent.
No problem.
Right after this break, the sport of girls flag football is booming across the country. We take a look at how the NFL is investing in future female athletes. Flag football is booming as a youth sport, and girls are leading the charge. According to the NFL, nearly 500,000 girls between the ages of 6 to 17 played in an organized flag football league last year. This year, the numbers are growing again, and the NFL is banking on this new demographic.
All right, let's do it, ladies. Today we're hosting the Ohio Girls High School Flag Football Camp at Massillon High School.
Of these more than 200 teenage girls, only some have played organized football before, but all of them grew up with the sport.
My whole family is like football players, so like they love football. My dad, he goes to football camps and stuff, and he helps out. And me and my sister, we're not there to participate, but sometimes we help out in drills. Hit it, nice, stay low.
Finally, it's their turn at the line of scrimmage.
Females are the future. Females in flag is something that we try to push.
Hannah Lee is the manager of youth football for the Cleveland Browns.
Football has been in Ohio for over 100 years, and girls high school flag within the past 4 has taken off.
She says the Browns and NFL see an opportunity.
We've seen the growth from 2 teams to 51 this past year in Northeast Ohio.
One of those players is Jay Jones.
I love catching, and I love being on defense.
Who says football is her life now.
Football is on my mind 24/7. I'm always watching football clips. When I see people playing football, I'm like, that's a good kid.
And has big dreams of playing on a larger stage.
I want to get with the big guys. I want to be up there. I want people to see me on TV and be like, Jay Jones just made the best catch ever.
And then there's soon-to-be freshman Candace Dolan.
I brought some of my teammates with me. We're here to have some fun and play some football.
It's the #1 priority for the league office. And when you start thinking about internally and domestically, but also too internationally, this will become a worldwide sport.
In 2020, the NFL started teaming up with other organizations to grow women's flag football on the collegiate level, even getting scholarships to play. High school teams are playing in tournaments organized by the Browns, and in 4 years, flag football will officially become an Olympic sport.
How amazing, how exciting. I am so ecstatic for our young ladies to be able to just be in a position to participate.
For flag football, the future is female, with professionals making sure girls get the opportunities they've been denied for decades.
A lot of people are like, girls don't play football, but just being out here today just proves that we can play football and we can do what anyone else could do.
Earlier this year, Tennessee and Colorado became the 10th and 11th states, respectively, to make girls flag football a state-sanctioned sport. The Cleveland Browns, who we were with there, hopes Ohio becomes the 12th. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on Mom Squad. Remember, connect with us on Facebook, Mom Squad with Maureen Kyle, or on Instagram at Mom Squad Show. We have more back-to-school coverage as we go throughout the next couple of weeks. I'm Maureen Kyle. We'll see you back here next time.